welcome back to the Earthdawn Survival Guide, the podcast for all disciplines, paths, players, and game masters. With your questers Josh and Dan, I'm Dan.
I am Josh, trying hard to stifle a yawn.
We are both falling asleep at the wheel today, so nothing to worry about there. On today's podcast, we will be discussing all things nautical once again in part 2 of our series on the Serpent River. This is Aras V'strimon. And I'll have to roll my R's on that one.
But before we get to that, we've got a couple of quick emails that we're going to answer. And actually, one other thing that I just want to announce because it's cool. I mentioned on the show a few weeks back about the crowdfund that was running for the Polish edition of Earthdawn. The campaign just wrapped as we are recording this, like a few hours ago. And the campaign ended with, after having done the conversion based on the current exchange rates, just a little bit over 61,000 US dollars in terms of funding. 780% of their funding goal was reached. So that's really cool. They hit a lot of stretch goals, and there is going to be a 4th edition Earthdawn in Polish.
Nice! Stick that in your pipe and smoke it, D&D. I'm kidding. I have no idea what they're up to.
They don't need to.
I'm over here poking bears. That's all I'm saying. I'm poking bears.
Well, it is Fat Bear Week, too.
Well, there you are. So, did not know that, but I'm just going to sit over here and be happy with myself poking bears. So, anyway, on to the quizzical portion of the show. Sorry, we missed that whole part there. This is from Anthony, or Tony. Hello, I hope you are both well. We're getting there, Tony. The game I'm currently running has reached the journeyman level, and the PCs have definitely swollen with power. When looking through the various opponents in the system and noting the challenge rating, first circle, second circle, and so on, when you read the flavor text, quite a few of them form largish groups. So is the estimate of difficulty for a single opponent or for a typical group?
It's an estimate for a single opponent. The ghoul, for example, is a second circle opponent, I think. The standard default ghoul out of the GM's guide.
Yeah.
But they typically travel in packs. And so having a pack the size of what is described in the GM's guide would be a little bit too much of a difficult challenge for actual second circle characters. But roughly speaking, and it is not an exact science, but roughly speaking, a 4th circle challenge is roughly equivalent or roughly a decent challenge for a 4th circle character. One of the other things that you'd want to look at, though, is the actual comparison rules that I believe are in the GM's guide, where you compare defense ratings to attack steps and damage to armor and various other factors to get a sense of how things actually shape up against a particular character or group of characters. But yeah, the challenge ratings in the GM's guide and in other places are sort of built off of a template that Morgan developed for internal use only, just to have a rough idea of where things fall out.
Fair enough. Tony goes on to say, I had several ghouls attack my party. They nearly had a sealed corridor to keep the casters safe behind the front line, but then a gap opened. The flood pouring through had them very frustrated that there are no attacks of opportunity when someone rushes past them. I did note that there is a shaman spell that gives that ability something about a bear, but otherwise there is no attack outside of your turn unless you have held an action. They prevailed, but I did have to make adjustments based on the situation. Ghouls were literally fighting on stacks of ghoul bodies, so I had them harried at that point. Is there a good guide between the flavor of the creatures being in packs and the circle of challenge they are considered? I think we answered that one already, but I think the attack of opportunity is maybe what he was wanting a different answer on.
Yeah,
Thank you, Tony.
So I don't really have an answer to that. Attacks of opportunity or that sort of thing were in 3rd edition D&D, and they are kind of in 5th edition as well, though not to the same extent. I can understand the frustration there. Earthdawn has never been a game that had that as a thing.
Yeah.
And I would keep that in mind when it comes to handling stuff. I mean, what you would be looking at is having tactics or or things that might knock down the opponent, or having talents like distract, which force a target to focus on a particular individual. There's a maneuver. I don't know whether it's listed for the ghouls, but I know it's listed, for example, on the Cadaver Man, where you can force them to attack you or to make yourself their target the next round. If you are finding that the breaking through the lines kind of thing is too difficult or too much of a problem for your group, you may want to make that a general purpose maneuver or option that people could use to force that attention. But when you're dealing with large groups, even if you have a strong defensive position, if something goes wrong, then that's a potential problem, and you need to figure out how to deal with it in the grand scheme of things.
Agreed. It's always narratively fun to try and figure those things out sometimes. I've occasionally handwoven it, just said, you get a free attack now because, yeah, you deserve one. But mechanics don't always back that up. On to one we got from Rasmus.
Before we get to that, you can absolutely do that, but that's a situation where if you are going to make that a regular thing, you need to decide whether that is something that potentially enemies would be able to take advantage of as well, so that your player characters don't do a similar thing where they rush past the sort of frontline physical combatants to go and hit the squishy mages at the back. Because in one sense, as the old saying goes, what's good for the goose? And if you are going to put things into a situation where the player characters are going to be able to do that, then at least intelligent enemies should be able to do so as well.
Agreed.
And a lot of that is how much of that you want to deal with as far as fairness in your game and whatnot. The maneuver is provoke. Misdirect is another one that's available on the Cadaver Man, where you can spend additional successes to direct the Cadaver Man to attack a particular target. But provoke is an option that you may want to look at if that's something that really becomes a problem. The Ghoul, incidentally, does also have provoke under its special maneuvers list. The specific details on that maneuver are in the GM's guide on page 252. The attacker may spend 2 additional successes from an attack test to enrage the creature and guarantee that they will be the sole target of the creature's next set of attacks.
There you go.
So you could potentially make that a universal option. It does require the extra successes on the attack test, but if you're dealing with a sort of journeyman group against packs of lower challenge opponents, then maybe rather than doing the extra damage, you can sort of do that to control the focus of the battle a little bit better.
Agreed. Okay, on to Rasmus.
Now, yes.
Hi, inspired by the latest episode, wouldn't it be great with a series that updates all the old material from earlier editions to match 4th edition timeline? Question mark. Maybe it is more of an official thing than a subject for your excellent podcast, but it would be great to have a kind of official guide to what has changed so it becomes easier to use all the potential a lot of us have on our shelves. It could be on the FASA webpage, and when finished, a Kickstarter or Kickstarter add-on. Love from Denmark, Rasmus.
Yeah, that's a great idea. It's just one that requires man hours and devotion to go to. I think when we are dealing with publications that we are releasing that interact in some way with previous material, that we are providing updates and whatnot. I mean, that's kind of, in some extent, what Empty Thrones has, is some updates to that material. Urupa is going to have some updates to the current status. I know there has been sort of a desire expressed to have 4th edition rules updates for earlier adventures and whatnot. Yes, that is a cool thing, but we don't have the time to devote to that on top of everything else that we've got going on. Eventually, yes, it is something that we would like to do, especially as we get more Foundry modules and stuff put out. It may be worthwhile for us to release a Foundry module for Infected or Terror in the Skies or something like that, and that could potentially necessitate a 4th edition update to the sort of stat blocks and rules for those, but that is not hardwired into any kind of plan right now, but we're aware that there are longtime fans who have an interest in that.
Fair enough. Speaking of an update, we got an email from Nick Lowe. And if that name rings a bell to you, here's why. Hey, Josh and Dan, just listened to the Contention podcast. Very cool. Just letting you know that there is a 4th edition update on both the Contention and the Ticambras, particularly their relationship with each other, that me and Kyle wrote for the Pirates and Thieves chapter of Empty Thrones. Part of that plays out during the actual campaign itself, so I'm not sure how relevant it is to the discussion. Just letting you know in case you guys wanted to check that material out. Anyway, thank you for the awesome content. Can't wait to hear more. Nick Lowe.
Yeah, Nick reminded me of that. Nick was also one of the primary writers on Vasgothia.
Yeah.
He's great. We had him on... Did we have him on the show?
I want to say we did.
Yes. Yeah, we did have Nick on the show.
Like episode 50.
Pretty sure we did.
Something like that.
Anyway, we
Nick.
will
Nick.
look at that. Hi, Nick. Yeah. We will look at that information. It slipped my mind. And when we get to the Ticambras episode, we will talk about that if necessary.
Yeah. I skimmed it. I remembered it was part of the campaign part, so I didn't want to spoil it for anybody who's actually trying to run Empty Thrones. And that's my excuse for the day. We're going to go with that. Okay, we have 2 to go. We'll save the short one for last. Actually, no, I'll tell you what. This one's going to be fun. Yeah, save that one for last. So, hi guys. Just listened to your last mailbag episode, and I wanted to share my idea on what to do when a player misses the session. The player character is still there and contributing, but in the background, tends to keep to themselves. Everyone has an off day, right? In combat, I do not roll for them, but rather describe their contribution narratively. In combat, usually the character is facing off with some goons, enough to keep him busy, but not enough to overwhelm. In social situations, they will fill the gaps. I'll narrate things like, Grompok agrees with you guys, and he says he's ready to go when you are... Or, Grompok doesn't really like the idea and grumbles something about not having a choice but to follow that stupid plan. And if the character is a magician, I have them blasting random goons here and there and also allow any typical buff spells they use to just work on characters. On top of that, I allow the rest of the group to use a number of successful actions equal to the character's circle and 1 epic action per tier. No rolls involved, just narrative. A successful action is something they want that character to complete, described narratively within reason, something that the absent player would likely do... would be likely to do, or something that is strongly reflected in the discipline. An epic action is kind of like get out of jail free card, and it can be something complex and above average, preferably inspired by previous deeds of the character. So, examples. 1. Let's say the group weaponsmith, circle 7, player is missing in the session, and the group is currently halfway through a care run. The group gets ambushed by a pack of ghouls. For the majority of the fight, the weaponsmith will be there, fighting 2 or 3 ghouls at the time, but let's say the rest of the group begins to struggle and starts losing. They can use their successful action allowance to have the weaponsmith one-shot a ghoul each turn, up to 7 times, 7th circle. To help cull the herd for the rest of them, his circle and equipment is good enough for it to happen reliably, and the ghouls are not pivotal to the story. Typical goons to deal with. 2. Later, the group is faced with horror inhabiting the care. Weaponsmith will be there, fighting it but having difficulty getting past its defenses, and from time to time will be knocked back, thrown around, so he needs time to get back to the fight. Unfortunately, the fight is going poorly, so the group decides to use the epic action, having known the weaponsmith to be very thorough, or to be very tough. Either way, he always makes use of temper self-talent to great extent, and his armor and shield are also very good. And having history of jumping in headfirst to defend his fellow adventurers, the players decide, and I as Game Master would agree, that he will bellow a war cry and start recklessly attacking the horror to keep its attention on himself. This gives the rest of the group 3 turns, relatively safe from the horror's attention, and the horror suffers a -3 penalty due to the wounds dealt by the assault. Numbers arbitrarily chosen by the Game Master to be something that will give them an edge, but not over the top. Again, no rolls involved, just storytelling. 3. Outside combat, the players can use the successful action allowance to use, for example, forge weapon with the result based on flat step number, plus maybe a bonus if they're in town and rent the use of a good quality forge. Or they can send the weaponsmith out to do shopping for them. Again, just use his conversation or haggle talent steps to judge how good he'll fare. This way, the group does not suddenly lose some of their capabilities, and I can run the adventure more or less the same way I planned for the full party. And since I give legend points equally to everyone, it gives me the excuse to not leave one out character from the legend point award. They were there and helped. I think you get the idea. Passion's blessing on you all. Bart, P.S. Thanks for your insight on my question about Game Master burnout. I managed to convince my group to take a pause from Earthdawn and play Cyberpunk, run by other members of our group. If you haven't, watch The Edge Runners on Netflix and play the PC or console Cyberpunk 2077. Both are awesome. I can already feel the pressure lifting and actually feel like reviewing my notes on my current campaign in Earthdawn and some not fleshed out adventure ideas. Just a tinker, no rush. Maybe something interesting will come out of it.
Cool. Yeah. I don't really have much to add there. That's a really cool example and a really good way of handling it. Another thing that came to mind when I read that email was a system that is used in a game called, I can't remember the name of the game now. It's the Powered by the Apocalypse sort of pirate game. I've talked about it on the show before. One of the things that is kind of part of that is you have the ship and additional crew members beyond the player characters. And if you have an NPC, a crew member, or other notable NPC that is along with your group on an adventure, if they are sort of helping out on something, they provide a bonus to the player's role for certain tasks. Like if they've got a member of the crew who's a good fighter, they might provide a +1 to blood rolls, which are sort of like the fighting rolls in that game. So you could do something kind of similar where the character on autopilot provides bonuses, but otherwise is just kind of occupied narratively. I think that's a really good solution without requiring you to devote attention to fully play them, but just kind of have them contribute to the story in the way that makes sense. With regards to the last comment, I have not seen Edge Runners yet. I did finally get around to picking up the video game, Cyberpunk 2077, because it was on sale on Steam a couple of weeks back, and finished my first playthrough recently. It's pretty good. The city, like, there's some really, really cool aspects in terms of the world design and stuff. There's still aspects of it that felt kind of, like, stripped down for me. Like, it felt still kind of a little bit short from what I expected in terms of, like, side quests and whatnot, and I suspect there may have just been a whole bunch of stuff that I missed, because the way the story is written feels a lot of pressure to get through those main story quests really quickly and not necessarily focus so much on the side quests. So I might have missed a whole bunch of stuff there. But yeah, I mean, it's pretty cool. I enjoyed it. I don't know that I will go back to it again anytime soon, but yeah, it's pretty cool.
Well, you own it at your leisure. That's what video games are there for. Last one. This is a fun one. Greetings again, Warden and Master of all things Earthdawn. I guess I'll be the Warden, Josh will be the Master. I am coming to you from the past, long Yellow Brick Road here, but on episode 35, Josh confirmed what I thought I heard in an earlier episode that he lives in Maine. It just so happens that I was in the Navy from 90 to 94, and the ship I was stationed on was the USS Arleigh Burke, DDG 51. It was the first Aegis destroyer of the U.S. Navy and built in Bath, Maine. In 93, I picked up my first copy of Earthdawn rulebook in the Tontine Mall of Brunswick and my wife Jamie from Bath. I thought it was rather cool to discover that I was in the same general geographical area as one of the main contributors of my favorite RPG. Squee, said the fanboy. As a visual person, I wanted to see a picture of who is speaking to me on my commute every day. The 11-year-old daughter who plays the game with us gets in the car this morning. Are you still listening to that? Jeez. So I was able to find an old YouTube interview with Josh, but Dan, the human laugh track voice, was impossible to find. Would you have an online photo of you somewhere, Dan? It's somewhere, I'll tell you that.
It's somewhere.
Just to be fair, this is a bad photo of most of the players in my game, playing Castles of Mad King Ludwig. I'm the one with the dumbass look on his face. Tim, the human nethermancer, ex-scout in blue. Dan, the orc gauntlet, not me. Ex-nethermancer hidden by the Chloe, the elf archer's hair. We had a change of disciplines with a couple of members as they are settling into their life's path. I have a Tiskrang shaman that I hope to play one day. Eyeballs at my Dan. That's all I got. Thanks for continuing the podcast through COVID and keeping the magic alive. See you in the future as soon as I can get there. Hope it is good. No spoilers. Thank you, Scott.
So, yeah, thank you, Scott. If you want to see Dan's lovely face, there is on the FASA Games YouTube channel.
Yep.
The live episode that we recorded at FreedoniaCon 2021, which is basically was like streamed the two of us live.
Yeah.
It is an episode that you will not have heard yet based on where you are.
Yeah.
But we are both visible and talking in that video. So track that down and you will be able to see both of us.
Exactly. And you're calling me pretty? Just kidding. Just kidding. Okay, so that covers the quizzical portion of our show. Thank you all, one and all, for emailing us. If you want to get a hold of us, please feel free to email us at edsgpodcast@gmail.com or go to anchor.fm and leave us a voicemail, because we would love to play more voicemails. I think we've only ever played, what, 2? 1? Something
two.
like that. Yeah. Either way.
Or don't.
Yeah, or don't.
It's up
Doesn't
to you.
Matter. So on to House V'strimon. And yes, I like to roll my R's on the V'strimon part. This is the House of Reeds, always denoted by a green reeds on a blue field as far as a flag is concerned. And their Gudonia is the bracelet of reeds native to Lake Ban, which are always green even after they're plucked, and worn on the right wrist. Initial thoughts on this one, because they pretty much control the Coil River, right? Which goes from the upper part of Urupa, the upper part of the Aras Sea, right near where it juts out into Urupa. And then this goes northwest up toward Lake Ban. So this is a very small part of the river, but a massively important one.
Yeah, well, so it not only goes from Urupa up to Lake Ban, the other stretch of the Coil River runs from Lake Ban all the way up to the foothills of the Throal Mountains. There is a port as far upstream as the Coil is navigable that is about a day or so roughly travel from the gates of Throal and Bartertown.
Yep.
And it is sort of a not insignificant port called Therans that is where the northern end of the Coil is, and a lot of the Throlic merchant traffic that's going on the river loads there.
Yeah, sorry. I keep forgetting it because you're right. It goes right past the Atape Rapids, past Therans, on up, continuing northwestern. So it just crisscrosses Lake Ban. So this is where Lake Ban is basically your four-way intersection of river travel.
Yes.
not in a good way.
Yeah, Lake Ban is technically neutral. It's technically part of the area that is subject to the Free Trade Compact. Mm-hmm. But House V'strimon's stronghold, the floating city, is pretty much right in the middle of Lake Ban, and consequently House V'strimon is able to exert quite a bit of power and influence over that area.
As you do. So V'strimon is one of the oldest aropagoi, which again, just to remind you, means honored center or trading house. This is based upon the tale of the old man and the nets, following the Parliament of Mermaids legend out of one of the original legend books. This is, however, just likely a confederation of river villages before the Therans arrived in Barsave. So this is exactly how old this is. And V'strimon stood firmly opposed to Theran subjugation, always has, always will. They loathe slavery above all things. And this is where we get the V'strimon protocols prescribe death for enslaving a name giver.
House V'strimon, because of their alliance with Throal, and because of other things that are set up in Barsave when the game came out and sort of the initial descriptions of locations and whatnot, before story events and the meta plot of first edition moved forward, House V'strimon are pretty clearly presented as the good guys, if not, one of the good guys on the river because of their alliance with Thrall being sort of also another sort of good guy faction, where you have pretty clearly the Throal and V'strimon alliance in contrast to the Thera and Catention. Those two basically are the opposing forces in that early political gamesmanship that's going on. And House V'strimon is wealthy and powerful in many respects and doing pretty well overall.
Agreed. So a couple of interesting things about House V'strimon and their offshoots, kind of. The airship Earth Dawn's first encounter was with a V'strimon riverboat, the Shikasta. So as one or two cares opened up and the Earth Dawn was set sail, the V'strimon was already out there on the river doing their thing. So this is how old House V'strimon is. And secondarily, Urupa, the city of Urupa, like we said, on the coast of the Aras Sea, grew up from a V'strimonian, that's a tough word to say, V'strimonian trade covenant that settled there. So they've been around for a while.
Yeah, so while Urupa as a city is relatively young, Urupa was founded and built after the Scourge. It did not exist prior to that point. Urupa, which we'll talk about maybe a little bit more later because it is kind of covered in this chapter,
A little bit,
is the result of the survivors of multiple cares coming together to band together for common defense during the early post-Scourge period, and the city sort of grew up as a result of that. One of the founding groups was a House V'strimon covenant, although the Peshestis, as they are known, are, I don't have my notes handy to double check, but I think technically they are independent at this point of House V'strimon.
Fair. I do not know. My research
I
didn't
don't
reveal.
recall right off the top of my head, but I think that's the way of things.
That's okay. So to Josh's point, and again establishing how old or how well established V'strimon is, they were the first house to establish regular trade with the Kingdom of Throal, also the first to establish trade at all with Urupa, and the first to cross the Aras Sea.
Yeah, that's something I didn't look into a whole lot, because the Tuscarang riverboats are not particularly well suited to open water travel that you would have on the Aras Sea. Sort of the flat-bottomed riverboats would not do so well in open water in a similar way that like the galleys of the Bronze Age and whatnot generally did not venture too far off the coast in the Mediterranean.
Agreed.
Generally speaking.
Yeah.
And so consequently, while they may have been the first, it is not something I think that they regularly do, because they don't have ships that are particularly suited to that task.
Yeah. First is one thing. Maintaining that, to Josh's point, is something else entirely. So you can go discover it and come back home.
Yeah, that would require a whole additional set of shipbuilding and ship design and crew training.
Yes.
That is not really part of the Serpent River culture.
Agreed. Absolutely agreed.
Yeah, part of the history of the Tuscarang, and we're talking, back in the early days around perhaps the founding of House V'strimon and stuff like that, and we'll probably talk about this a bit more with House Syrtis because I think they're a little bit more involved in it, is the conflict between the Tuscarang and their riverboats and the elves and their more traditionally designed wind-powered craft, one of which still operates in the Aras Sea, and a few others that are now restricted just to the Bloodwood, because in that conflict, the Tuscarang basically won.
Because it's river, and they're going to win.
Yeah, in part because they had the superior technology. When you have a powered vessel that is not subject to the whims of the wind, you are typically going to have an advantage your opponents in that regard.
I agree entirely. If anybody wants to genuflect a little bit on the Aras Sea, it basically is the Black Sea in modern day.
No.
It's not the Black Sea?
No, the Death's Sea is the Black Sea.
I'm sorry. I had that backwards. Never mind.
Yeah, the Aras Sea is, I think, roughly equivalent to the Caspian, I think is the name of it.
Yeah. Okay, sorry. I had it backwards.
That's okay.
Never mind.
The geography does not match up exactly if you try and make it fit. There are lots of people who have tried to do so and gotten headaches because of it. That's just the general sense of things. Mm-hmm. Coastlines don't match exactly, even if you try and factor in, oh, well, here's how things might have changed over the course of the past 8,000 years and whatever. That's roughly what it is.
Fair enough. Nope, I was looking at a National Geographic program called Drain the Oceans, and one of the episodes I came across recently was about the Black Sea. So anyway, I had the wrong sea. Don't worry about it, but check out the episode. It's still fun for shipbuilding references. So one of those things. Anyway, the Bakshivas, so this is how involved V'strimon has been with other things. So the Bakshivas, the pirate tolls from House Catention, used to drain the wealth from the V'strimon boats because V'strimon refused slave money, essentially, from Catention to travel across Lake Ban, leading to conflict up until the Care closings. This is all pre-Scourge. So V'strimon boats laid 3 full sieges, took place on the floating city from House Catention, and V'strimon supported rebels who fought against the Therans. So this is the big interconflict between House V'strimon and House Catention and so forth. And so it's been going on since before the Scourge, and it's still going on.
Yeah, the two houses have had a rivalry, and we talked about this with our episode on House Catention a couple of weeks back.
Yeah.
Generally speaking, again, because of their alliances and their struggles over that sort of stretch of the Serpent between Lake Ban and the other one, the one that Catention is near. The lesser lakes I can never remember.
Nope. Lake Pyros? No. It's on the
There's
way.
Lake Vors, Lake Pyros, and one other, and I can never remember which one is which.
Yeah, Lake Pyros is down along the Serpent River between House Catention and House V'strimon. Okay, yay, cool.
It's Lake Pyros.
I'm staring at my map because my geography sucks.
That's the one that I'm thinking of. That stretch sort of between Lake Ban and Lake Pyros has been sort of fought over, although at this point House V'strimon has a stronger claim over it in terms of the alliances and whatnot.
Fair. So speaking of the V'strimon protocols, I'll bring us back to this one real quick. The Shivalahala V'strimon was impressed that the dwarves could capture so much cultural essence in written word that she began combining ancestral memories with scribes and library scholars to combine oral traditions and stories to their written word. And the V'strimon protocols basically publish a new volume each year, adding more to their stories. And so I think this is a nice little thing to have in the background for some flavor text, either to include as a plot point for an adventure or at least have floating around in the background as something to know about for the adventure that you may be laying seed to. Thoughts?
Yeah.
I just like to put out a new volume every year. So they're in the book publishing business, which I think is very cool.
In a sense.
So V'strimon has continued to oppose and disrupt and combat and attack Thera in all locations in as many ways as possible because they brook no quarter against Therans and slavers. So that's what they're up against. How about we talked about the 9 diamonds with House Catention. We should probably talk about the floating city itself in Lake Ban because this is their headquarters, their island. Go for it.
I love the floating city. The floating city is probably, in all honesty, one of my favorite locations in Barsave.
Agreed.
I think it is just really, really cool. It is this city that is built on top of a densely woven
reeds
growth of reeds that have grown up from the bottom of Lake Ban through careful tending and I'm sure a hefty amount of elemental magic and stuff like that. Yeah. But it is basically a whole bunch of closely packed reed islands with buildings and structures and everything on top of them, with canals and waterways kind of running all in throughout them. I think kind of like Venice in a sense.
Yeah.
And there are also like, bridges and walkways and so forth at higher levels going between these areas as well. But rather than having streets the way that you would in Bartertown or Urupa or most other places, these are all waterways where there are canal boats and canoes and smaller vessels that kind of are used as transport from place to place. Very Tiskrang, but still kind of cosmopolitan because of its location in the middle of Lake Ban. It is a significant trading hub and just has a lot of really kind of cool locations. And when I run games in Earthdawn, trips through the floating city happen pretty frequently because of where it's located. Mm-hmm. It's a really great place to stop off when you're going from one location to another. If you're trying to get across the Serpent, there are frequent ferries that are running from the shores of Lake Ban from one side to the other, but a lot of them will run from a shore to the city, and then you pick up another ferry that goes from the city to the location that you're trying to get to. So there's a lot going on there. It's got a lot of Tiskrang, which are well known to be my favorite name giver race.
Yeah.
And so Lake Ban is just a lot of fun, has a lot of cool locations, and it is also tied very strongly to the themes of elementalism because the Shivalahala V'strimon is a powerful elementalist. And so there are 5 towers in the city, each representing one of the 5 elements in Earthdawn's sort of mysticism.
Yeah, and they do form a perfect pentagon. So you've got one tower of wood, one of fire, one of air, one of earth, one of water, as Josh said. The 6th tower is dead center, equidistant between all 5 of those towers as well. And just to put this all in perspective, the floating island itself is 300 yards wide, 900 feet, almost a fifth of a mile, 0.27 kilometers, in case you were actually going to do the metric system on that one. I did all that for you.
It's actually not that large. While it does have buildings on it, none of them are especially tall.
Yes.
Because while the reed islands are able to support the weight of the buildings and piers and jetties and everything that's on them,
yes,
none of the buildings are more than 3 stories high. It is densely populated, but only in the sense that everything there is packed in a relatively small amount of space.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a single living organism growing from a central root. So I can't say it sways with any current of the river, but it's pretty well moored as where it's going to stay in place. So after the crocus blooms, which is mid-March to mid-April our time, it's mid-Charasa to mid-Rua, Earthdawn calendar, the island blooms with purple flowers, hence crocus. There's a 3-day holiday known as the Festival of Flowers. But yeah, this is, as Josh said, very busy with canals, very densely populated as far as just a lot of Tiskrang, mostly, living there. So some other examples, if you want to look these up, Ganvi in Benin, Africa, Kopanyi in Thailand, Wuzhen Watertown in China, and the Uros village in Peru, which is actually near Lake Titicaca. That one's actually made from reeds. So you can go take a look at any of those 4 cities and see if you want some visual references as to how this might work and operate for when you're going to run your game. I took a look at them because I'm like, I want to see if we had any of these on Earth. We do. It's amazing. I'm also a big fan of Atlas Obscura, so that works there. So the floating city is actually a citadel covered by a dome of elemental air. And you cannot enter this city by air. It is nigh impossible or actually impossible. So the northeast berths of the river are for the V'strimon war vessels. Just a little wrinkle to throw in there if you're going to travel to the floating city by boat. They do have 4 marketplaces and numerous bathing sites along the shoreline. And the central foundation house is a maze of courtyards, gardens, and fountains, and it can house 1,000 Tiskrang inside just the central foundation house. So it's a pretty nice place to go. The map of it is fantastic. I think you could run like 2 or 3 campaigns and never leave the city. Just one of those enclosed locations you can play around with there as well. We should talk about the Shivalahala herself.
Yeah, I mentioned her briefly. The Shivalahala is a very powerful elementalist. There's a story that is recounted in the original Serpent River book about how during the Theran War, the first Theran War, the Therans were sending some airships against the floating city to try and cause problems for them because V'strimon was helping Throal against the Theran siege by running supplies through the underground river passages to the city. Basically, the story involves the Shivalahala leading an elaborate ritual one morning that turned all of the elemental air in the hulls of those airships into elemental earth, causing the airships to fall out of the sky and plunge beneath the surface of Lake Ban.
To hang in the air exactly the way in which bricks don't.
Yeah, that was the phrase that came to mind as well, the late lamented Douglas Adams.
Yes.
But sort of not just the power of the ritual that was involved, but also the absolute ice-cold cool with which the Shivalahala received the news and handled it.
Yes.
Upon the arrival of the news, where the messenger was sort of like came and arrived and passed the message, the Shivalahala was having dinner and just continued to eat. Mm-hmm. And when the message was repeated, was like, I heard you the first time. I'm not going to rush.
Yes.
It's bad for the digestion.
I have a plan.
But we need to move the air. Everything's fine. Don't worry about it.
We got this.
We'll deal with it. And then went and dealt with it in dramatic fashion.
Spectacular fashion.
To tie into sort of ongoing storylines, those sunken airships, there's an adventure hook that has the player characters recovering one or more of those sunken airships from the bottom of Lake Ban and dealing with that, because in the ongoing sort of pre-war effort, there is an idea for what they might be used for. So that's a cool little story hook that's kind of involved there.
Totally.
But yeah, the Shivalahala V'strimon is just very self-assured and very powerful and very calm and not someone that you mess with. Probably one of the most potent elementalists in Barsave.
Yes. She's described as the greatest living elementalist. That's up for debate, but I wouldn't want to debate her. She's also a quester of Jaspree, unrivaled in trade and politics, profit and risk. So they know a thing or two about a thing or two.
Well, that's the advantage when you've got racial memory of several centuries worth of previous Shivalahalas to draw from.
Yes, exactly. Those who know history are not doomed to repeat it. So, but she has this disguise of shallow urbanity about her, but that's not her true persona.
Yeah, she's very cunning. She's very canny. She's very intelligent, but she's also calm and laid back and presents this front of being down to earth in a way.
Yeah.
Does not have the need for posturing that other powerful political leaders have. And I think part of that is a testament to why House V'strimon has succeeded as well as it has.
Yeah.
Not only historically, but also recently within the events in Barsave over the past few decades.
Absolutely. So the hierarchy of House V'strimon. So we're starting with the Shivalahala, who is a fantastic character to play with. Below her is the Council of Crew Covenants, which are basically comprised of all the captains of all the riverboats. And then there's the Council of Trade Covenants as well. So basically there's 2 groups and the Shivalahala that do what they're supposed to do. So that's all there is to it. The goals of House V'strimon are they want to take their 40-member villages that they used to have from the first Theran War, and they want to protect their sphere of influence and, of course, maintain prosperity and, of course, fighting House contention. So basically just kind of maintain what they got right now and not lose any ground. So they're not really about Yeah, I mean, gaining more profit, that's all to Scrang, essentially, and, keeping their sphere of influence and maintaining prosperity. Yeah, they want to keep the level of lifestyle they've got right now. They're not really looking to take over anything or land grab, or in this case, river grab. They don't want to dominate the whole world. They just like doing what they're doing, and they keep doing it.
And they're doing it well. They are
succeeding.
Relatively speaking, certainly in comparison to House Catention, which is a lot more autocratic and does not have the representation really in terms of how the aropagoi is led from the various member villages and whatnot in other parts of the river. There's a much more communal, democratic feeling about House V'strimon with a couple of different councils, and in a sense, the stereotypical T'Skrang Serpent River culture is House V'strimon's culture.
There.
In a way. There are some similarities with House Catention in terms of it being the result of multiple villages banding together and eventually becoming a cartel that controls a certain area. But House Catention is a lot more militaristic and a lot more autocratic and top-down in terms of its structure. And I don't get that sense as much from House V'strimon. I mean, there's still sort of the leadership of the Shivalahala, but I feel like there is a lot more openness and a lot more...
I'd say cooperation.
Yeah, like cooperative feeling about how this aropagoi operates.
I agree. That's all the notes I've got on House V'strimon. Do we want to cover anything else on Urupa?
No, I think we'll save Urupa for now because I'm working on a book for it.
Fair.
House V'strimon is wonderful.
The floating city is fantastic.
The floating city is fantastic, where they are allied with Throal. One of the things to maybe think about if you're kind of using them in a present-day bar save game is that the relationship with Throal might be a little bit more strained and difficult than it had been with Thrall's sort of new family. We talked about with the House Catention episode a couple of weeks back that could be a bit of leverage that House Catention might be able to use to work their way into getting a good deal and to being able to trade on the lower Coil River, especially to be able to get access to the very lucrative Aras Sea trade. House V'strimon is, of course, would be very interested in not letting that happen, because while it wouldn't kill them, financially speaking, it would cut a very
sizable
worthwhile source of income from them.
Yeah.
And because of the long-standing rivalry between House Catention and House V'strimon, anything that Catention is sort of pushing for, House V'strimon is likely to be against. But you've got that relationship with Throal that could be worked that way. House V'strimon are, generally speaking, good guys when it comes to the various Great T'Skrang powers. The floating city is fantastic. They're, really nice. They've got the connection with Urupa and a lot of good sort of river travel stuff. But also keep in mind that they are, like any of the other great houses, ultimately interested in maintaining, at least, if not expanding, their own political and economic power within the province.
Yeah.
I imagine if you wanted to go with something really dramatic in terms of a storyline, having something happen that causes a lot more open conflict between House V'strimon and House Catention, there certainly would be an interesting alliance that could be formed between House V'strimon and House T'Cambris, because both of them have interest in seeing House Catention be held in check, if not reduced even more in power and prestige than they have been.
Agreed. I think this is ripe for the plucking to use House V'strimon in numerous ways. So until next time, folks, if you have any questions for us, again, drop us a line at edsgpodcast@gmail.com. We'll read just about everything on the air. So it's going to get answered. I promise you that. Up next for the Serpent River. Certus is coming up soon, so we'll get to that one eventually. So until next time, go visit the floating city for your legend.
Good night, everybody.